are listening to the 90 Days Later podcast with Anna Charles, episode 74. Welcome to the 90 Days Later podcast, where I show you how to stop overdrinking in 90 days without missing out on life. If you're not an alcoholic, but fed up with saying yes to a drink when you mean to say no, you're in the right place. Hi all, and welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm talking about why not drinking is easy. Might be a little triggering for some of you. Why is she saying that? Can't be so. I'm going to explain all. Okay, so we are told all the time that changing your drinking is hard, right? People tell us it's so hard. They even say it's impossible to moderate. It's absolutely impossible, categorically impossible to moderate, even though I have first-hand experience and knowledge of people who do it successfully all the time. It's one of the top things my clients come to me for. So that's what we hear a lot, right? It's just so hard. And maybe we think, no, but it really is hard. And that's because I've tried it before. I mean, I tried to change my drinking before and I didn't succeed. Maybe we think that's why you need to avoid bars. You need your spouse to support you. You know, I see this so often, right? I used to think it was hard too. So we're sort of surrounded we're in this pool of it's just really hard to change. Just, there we go. End of story. But of course, I want to offer a different perspective today. And I don't want to be facetious. This might sound facetious, but it is easy to not drink. How? You just don't drink. Staying away from drinking is the easy part. You just don't do it. And you commit to not drinking no matter what. In fact, it's easier to not drink. There's fewer actions. You don't have to order the drink, buy the drink, tell yourself you're not going to drink. All of that stuff. You don't have to lift it up. You don't have to then sip it. You don't have to swallow it. All of the things. It's just easier to not drink. So on the surface level, yes, not drinking is easy. The hard part is what's left. It's what you'll feel. The hard part is allowing the urges. The hard part is being self-conscious and listening to everyone tell you that you should drink, when you're out there desperately trying not to do it. The hard part is living with yourself without drinking and what will come up. And that this has to be more important to you than escaping yourself through drink. Now, most of us like the idea of not drinking so much. It sounds altruistic, and it sounds like it should be a good thing. And, we know that logically it's better for our health and all the rest of it. But when we come down to it, we'd actually much rather use wine to relax, when push comes to shove at the end of the day. So when you come home from work and you're stressed, you actually have to be more motivated to feel stressed than to drink the Pinot Grigio. You have to be more willing to experience the negative emotions that are going to come up than to just forget about them and escape in your glass of wine. It's this experiencing the emotion that's the hard part, or the frustration or the anxiety that goes along with it, all the emotions. What you get when you change your drinking, when you stop drinking, when you reduce your drinking, is you get your view of your life unvarnished, unfiltered. You get your thoughts about you and your choices. I mean, it's just really like saying hello to you again, right? It's like imagining an Instagram picture with no filter whatsoever. So here's what so often happens that I see. You decide you want to change your drinking and you start to think about it. You start to think about what it entails. And very quickly, you're going to hear from other people that changing habits is really hard. I mean, you know that, right? It's really hard. Did you know that, Anna? It's going to be really hard. It's really hard to say no, and it's really hard to change your desire for wine, just like it's really, really hard to change your eating habits, right? I hear this forever. And then you're going to go into places like Facebook groups and so on, and they're all going to hear the same things. Yeah, it's just really tough. No wonder I struggle. It's just really hard to change my drinking. So you're going about living your life wanting to create this thing for you, and you're hearing everywhere that it's hard, and you start to buy into it. Even if, this is the intriguing thing, even if the people we're hearing it from are not experts, even if they haven't actually got to the other side yet, even if you're hearing this from people who don't struggle with drinking, right? They know nothing about this, but they'll be, yeah, that's really hard. I know it's going to be really hard for you. And you're hearing this from people who may still for themselves be trying to find a way that works. So of course they're feeling it hard. They're feeling it's hard. But what happens then is we take on their belief, because everyone seems to be saying that it's hard to change our drinking. So we take that on at face value because it's the most often repeated opinion. And then we hear that urges are the worst thing and that the best way to handle temptation is to hide away or not to go out. And I hear many people frustrated that their spouse won't, quote unquote, support them enough by removing alcohol from the house or also by stopping drinking. But all of this stuff, right, everything we're saying here, all of the things we're demanding have happen is just giving the alcohol the power. Because what we're saying is if we come face to face with it, if I come face to face with my favourite wine, we're going to crumble and we're going to give in, and then we're going to have to start all over again. That's another one of my bugbears, by the way, counting days. And when we do that, it means we have to be prepared to find it even harder next time. I remember doing this myself. I remember telling myself this is going to be so hard. It's going to be miserable. It's going to be so dreary. That was my word of the time. I couldn't imagine life without wine. And in fact, just before I started changing my relationship with alcohol, I lost a fair amount of weight. And I remember my motivation for this. It was that if I lose weight and I manage to eat a little bit less, that means I can still drink. Because I couldn't imagine not drinking, right? I was quite happy because I knew the drinking would give calories, empty calories, might, bump my weight up a little bit, but that'd be okay because I'd be eating less. I mean, talk about warped thinking. Anyhow, all that thinking just reinforced to me how hard it was going to be to change your drinking. And all of this, I want you to think about, all of this is said before you even make one change, right? It's kind of like, it's just what I was hearing. It's not folklore. It's kind of like the law, just the way it is, and we adopt it as our belief. And actually just saying here, just writing this podcast and just speaking to you now, I'm finding it to feel exhausting just talking about it. Anyhow, so that's where we start with it, everyone saying how hard it's going to be. Now, the other thing about this is that when we go around saying how hard it is, what we're doing is we're kind of preparing the ground for failure. And we're preparing ourselves for an easy out. We're going to then be ready to leap to defend ourselves rather than take responsibility when things don't work out, and they won't to start with. Right? Well, that's why we failed. It's hard, right? Remember, we all agreed that this is really hard, so of course, I just wasn't able to do it. So when you tell yourself it's difficult to change your habits and it's difficult to change your drinking and it's difficult to say no to urges, not only is that not actually true, but you've taken yourself and your self-responsibility out of the argument. You're offloading all of that and you're just saying, I'm not able to do this because it's all about the alcohol and its power. But I want to offer something different. How we find something, our experience of life, whether we think it's hard to stop over drinking or easy, is created in our minds by our own thoughts, and that is in fact what is meant by managing your mind. Now, you're going to have countless examples of this in your life that have nothing to do with drinking. So I want you to think about that because I think that can help us see, oh yeah, I get this. Now, recently, Barry Humphries died of Dame Edna fame. Very sad, of course. And we actually went to one of his shows once, my husband and I, and my husband laughed hilariously and uproariously all the way through. I found it perplexing that he could find it so funny. I was kind of like mega curious. Why is he laughing so much? This is so not funny, right? And it's very easy. The answer is very simple. He was having the thought, my husband was having the thought, this is so funny and hilarious. And I was having the thought, I'd rather be anywhere but here, right? In both cases, our responses, our reactions, and our experience were created by thought in our mind because what we were experiencing, the thing we were there to see, the show, was the same for both of us. Same circumstance, different thoughts, different experience. I'm sure you all have similar examples of this in your life, and I really encourage you to think of some. This is hugely significant because when you can see this at work in another area of your life, you'll be able to then see how you could apply that to drinking. Right, seeing how that you can choose to think about something, how you choose to respond to something like an urge, how you choose to think about that can totally change your experience. It can change your belief that you are on the way to changing your habit. Because the reason you pick up the wine and the reason you carry on picking up the wine is because of something you're telling yourself and because of something you're feeling. Perhaps along the lines of, if I drink, I'll feel relaxed. I deserve a reward. It's just one. I'll start tomorrow. Those were some of my go-tos that I remember back in the day. Now, all of this is brilliant news, because when you can see this, you can also see that you are the one creating the desire for the alcohol, because it is just liquid. It just sits there. When you believe the wine is tempting you, it's just your thoughts doing that. And you already know this to be true. So I want you to do a little exercise right now here on the podcast. I want you to think of a drink you don't like. So for me, it was tequila or whiskey. And yes, I know I talk about having like Southern Comfort. I know that's actually, I think it's classified as a whiskey. Not entirely sure. Anyway, but sort of whiskey, single malt, the expensive stuff. Ugh. I never ever felt tempted by it. Even went on whiskey tasting events, and they were just all disgusting. Kind of hilarious. Anyway, so think of something you don't like, and I'll offer then it's just alcoholic liquid. So for me, it was just like the wine that I found so hard to resist. Takes a bit of getting your head around, but if you look at it sort of from a factual perspective, that's what we're dealing with: alcoholic liquid in a glass or in a bottle that we have thoughts about. And it's certainly going to feel as though there are lots and lots of thoughts and feelings between you and the glass of wine on the table in front of you, or between you and the bottle of beer in the table in front of you. Which means it's all about you, baby, which is super great news, which is exactly why not drinking is easy. You do this by getting really to know yourself, to become fascinated by yourself. But this isn't a one and done thing. What's so interesting is the way that the thoughts change after we've decided we're going to make the change, right? So they're often still centered on this central premise that changing your habit is so hard. So I would make the decision that I wanted to make a change, right? I was with that. I sort of had dropped there, well, it's going to be too hard for you. I was kind of in that, right, I'm going to do this. But then my thoughts turned into, they kind of became quite victim-y. That's my main memory of that time. I'd think things like, well, it's not fair. I'm doing this, but it's not fair. Why can everyone else drink and not me? I wish I didn't have to do this. I should be having better thoughts about this. And how could I ever have got myself into this situation? Right? So even though I was taking steps to change, I was actually blaming myself and feeling bad about it, even though I was the one choosing to make the change. So no wonder my results to start with were spotty. But there's a huge difference between something feeling hard and something feeling like a struggle. Yes, it might feel hard to change the habit, just to start with, by being aware and remembering you're doing something different now, right? Just remembering that. I've just got to stay aware. That was a bit tricky to start with. That was a big one for me. Just staying conscious with it. That might feel hard, but compare that to the struggle of when you start to judge yourself, right? Why did I get into this position where I'd have to do this work to change my drinking? I mean, what is wrong with me? Right, so the actions are the same. You're changing your patterns, your habits. You may be trying to have your first drink half an hour later, for instance, but your experience of doing that work is totally different, because your experience is created by your thoughts and feelings created in your mind. If you're finding it hard, it might just be, it's a bit tricky, but I can write it down and I can remember to do this. If you're finding a struggle, it's, here we are again, having to do this thing, this work, and I shouldn't be here. This is not how I saw my life was going to be. But what happens is when you're thinking, this should be easier for me, you aren't actually talking about what is actually happening. You're just repeating a story you have adopted based on what you've heard around you time and again, that it's hard to change your drinking. And ironically, thinking this way is actually going to make it harder for you. And here's why. Think about when you decide to change a habit, right? Think about when you decided to change your drinking. I talk a lot about mindset and taking decisions and so on. So yes, that's so important. But you also need to take action, even if it's just the action of not drinking. So if you're sitting there feeling sorry for yourself, berating yourself for having to do this, feeling terrible that you got yourself into this spot, you're going to be creating a lot of annoyance and self-pity and negative emotion. And when you're thinking that, guess what happens? You're going to start actually acting like you're the victim. And then try taking action from that place. So much harder. But it doesn't have to be hard. And here's why. This one will turn you on its head. People say things like, well, I've been drinking so long, I love my white wine, I really like the taste, it's so hard to stop. But I want you to consider this. Let's say you're in love with a man for 10 years. So you couldn't imagine living a day without him. And then you found out that he was really mean to animals, right? You found out that the person you know isn't the person you thought you knew. It won't take you, I would imagine, a lot of time to sort of finish with him and stop loving him and stop thinking he's the best thing since sliced bread. You're going to probably immediately move out, and it would be a decision you'll take easily, and it's a decision you take based on a thought. Your thought about him, because he's still the same man. So how do you do it, you might ask? How do you go about changing your thoughts and stop thinking that changing your drinking is hard? Well, there's a couple of things. I talk a lot about needing to be willing to fail. This is so important, because if you will only take action when you're sure you can do this perfectly, you're either going to delay taking any action at all, which is where procrastination rears its head, or then you're going to be willing to pounce on yourself with even more judgment if things do end up going wrong. See, I told you so. Told you this wouldn't help. The way to keep out of this is with curiosity. Curiosity is your best friend in this process. Be intrigued, curious, interested. Be willing to be delighted with yourself as being willing to fail. And be willing to have both at the same time. I think about the first time I went skiing. I was absolutely prepared to fall over. I mean, yes, look at anyone for the first time on the skis and they're on their bottoms. Wasn't unexpected. But I was also willing to be delighted at myself if I was able to stay on the skis for even maybe 20 seconds longer, despite all the odds. That's what I'm talking about. Look for both sides of the equation, because then you can learn from when things don't go to plan, but you can also learn from when things do go to plan. So I want you to step into curiosity and ask how you would want to decide to choose on purpose, how you want to think about yourself and your drinking and your ability to get the result you want. What would you choose to think about all those things? Would you choose to think, oh, this is so hard and everyone says it's so hard and so few people manage to do this? And by the way, moderation is impossible. Or would you choose to think, well, this is just a new skill I'm learning. It's a skill I happen to not have yet, and it might take some work, but of course I will do it. Just think about how different the experience of those two approaches will be. Not just in terms of the result and the speed with which you achieve it, but actually your experience of living life day to day as you do it, supporting yourself, encouraging yourself, rather than victim blaming your way to why this isn't going to work. If you were to take that different approach, if you were to look also at the positives, you wouldn't have all this resistance. You wouldn't have all this judgment. You wouldn't have all this negative emotion. You wouldn't be letting yourself off the hook and relying on excuses. You wouldn't be putting your foot on the brake at the same time as moving forward with the accelerator. You would just be taking responsibility and moving forward. I think these decisions are exciting. Think about it. I've never heard anyone say, I regret not drinking. I wish I had drank so much more. So your decision is a great decision for you. You just have to keep making it. Keep choosing you. Keep filling your brain with alternative ideas. Keep listening to the podcast. Get coached. Work with me. This is why coaching gets such hugely positive results. You're working on this with someone else, right? You're going to be onto yourself. Because with your brain left unsupervised, it's going to tell you it's totally fine. Nah, you've had a bad day. Go on, just have one glass. But the more you practice these new ways of thinking, the easier and the more automatic it gets. It really does get easier because the brain likes to work that way, and these new way of thinking, these new thoughts, they will get delegated. So you're more efficient and you'll think they're more on automatic pilot than the ones you're thinking today. And here's the thought I want to leave you with for those times when you might be sitting there thinking, don't care what Anna says, this is so hard. It's easier to do this work, to back yourself, to be prepared to fail, to look to your future, to look to possibility, than it is to drink and be hungover again and again and again. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next week. If you like what you're learning in the podcast and you want to take the work further and achieve total freedom around alcohol, let's talk. I help my clients stop reaching for that first glass of wine the moment 6 p.m. rolls around, and they don't miss out on life. And we do it in 90 days. The effect is permanent. Email me for more information on anna@90dayslater.co. And if you did enjoy the show, I'd really appreciate if you'd leave a rating and review to help others find the 90 Days Later podcast.